Hello, this is Michael from the Audible Local Ledger in Mashpee, Massachusetts on Thursday, March 12th, 2026, reading selected articles from the Provincetown Banner. First article: Cape Cod panel OK's fee on sales of pricey homes. Funds to go toward easing housing crisis. An article by Zain Razak. The Barnstable County Assembly of Delegates on February 18th voted 10 to 5 to push for special legislation that would allow Cape towns to place a transaction fee on pricey real estate sales. Carl Friesel of Brewster, John R. Fuller, Orleans, J. Terrence Gallagher from Eastham, Dan Gesson from Falmouth, Lillianne Green from Wellfleet, Elizabeth Harder from Harwich, Brian O'Malley from Provincetown, John Oman from Dennis, Sally Ty from Truro, and Susan Warner from Yarmouth supported the measure. These 10 delegates represent 51.4% of Barnstable County's population. Frank Fredrickson of Barnstable, James Killian of Sandwich, Michael King of Chatham, Greg McKelvey of Mashpee, and Wayne Sampson of Bourne voted in opposition. Deputy Speaker Gesson sponsored and authored the measure. Before the vote, he said the transaction fee would help fund initiatives to ease the housing crisis, such as deed restrictions or down payment assistance programs. Quote, "There are so many tools available to our towns to create housing and to preserve the communities that we love here on the Cape, but those tools are only available to us if we give them the source of funding they want," end quote, Gesson said. During public comment, residents sounded off on the measure. Sandy Jones from Barnstable said that she opposes the fee. For many seniors, their only asset is their home. Quote, "They invested in their homes. Whether it is for retirement or for this particular age group, they have to sell their homes because they need nursing care or whatnot. It does not seem fair to impose this tax on them," end quote, said Jones. "We have 40% senior citizens living in Barnstable." Quote, "They cannot afford another tax, and that's exactly what this is," end quote. Barnstable resident Ella Sampu, speaking in favor of the fee, says the Cape has, quote, "an indisputable problem that spiraled out of control during the pandemic," end quote. Quote, "Multi-millionaires and billionaires scramble to buy up spare homes on Cape Cod and pull the ladder up after them," end quote, said Sampu. Quote, "This has had a negative impact on local people, and a real estate transfer fee is a real opportunity to mitigate this damage. It is meant to reallocate resources from second homeowners who treat this place like a vacation land and leave their homes empty for most of the year," end quote. The measure now goes to the state legislature. If the state legislators approve of the measure, towns would adopt the fee through a town meeting vote followed by a town election. The transfer fee would range from 0.5% to 4% on real estate sales that exceed $1 million. Participating towns can opt for a higher exemption threshold. The fee would only apply to the value above the threshold. For instance, on a $1.5 million sale with a 2% fee, only $500,000 above the threshold would be subject to the fee, generating $10,000, said Gesson in a statement. Towns can also adopt other exemptions, including first-time homebuyers, year-round residents, and retired individuals on fixed incomes, he said. In April, the Assembly formally declared a housing crisis on Cape Cod, a resolution introduced by Gesson. In 2024, an optional real estate transaction fee for Massachusetts towns was on the mind of a featured speaker at the annual Housing to Protect Cape Cod conference. The state's then top housing official, Edward Augustus, told Cape and Islands housing supporters then to keep advocating for legislation that would allow Massachusetts cities and towns to adopt a real estate transaction fee on high-end home sales. Before voting on the full proposal, 7 delegates also approved Sandwich Delegate Killian's amendment to exempt any transfer by any owner or co-owner of a primary residence in Barnstable County who is at least 62 and lived at the property for at least 10 years by the time of the title transfer. End of article. Next article. Coastal erosion. Living with a coastline that never stays still. An article by Heather McCarran. On Cape Cod and the islands, change isn't the exception, it's the rule. Long before seawalls and revetments lined sections of the shoreline, the Cape functioned as a constantly shifting system of sand, water, and wind. A place where erosion wasn't a problem to fix, but a process that built the beaches and dunes people now cherish. The Cape Cod Regional Policy Plan of 2025 highlights coastal erosion as the top concern among Cape residents who completed a survey, second to only affordable housing. The Times is taking a deep dive into the coastal erosion issues on Cape Cod and Nantucket. By any measure, Cape Cod is a landscape defined by movement, an outsized spit of sediment left when glaciers retreated. Bluffs collapsed in Wellfleet, beaches migrate in Orleans, sand bills outward at Provincetown and Monomoy, even as it disappears elsewhere. Most of this comes down to finding the balance between homes, infrastructure, habitat, and natural processes, end quote, said Brian McCormick, the coastal processes and hazard specialist for Barnstable County. Erosion and disposition are key words in coastal erosion conversations, not opposites, but partners. Lately, though, the lexicon is evolving. Retreat is gaining ground in the face of rising sea levels, and coastal management is no longer optional, but urgent. Quote, "The beach is the interface between the ocean and the land, where the ocean waves naturally remove and deposit sand over time," end quote, said Ellie Baker, a senior coastal resilience planner with Sandwich, based the Horsley Witten Group. The movement is influenced by currents and the seasons, with winter's higher energy storms typically bringing the most change, she said. Without it, the Cape's iconic landscapes simply could not exist. Quote, "Every grain of sand that is eroded is also deposited. It doesn't go away, it just goes somewhere else," end quote, said McCormick. Quote, "Erosion is what helps to maintain downdrift beaches, dunes, and many wetland features," end quote. On the geologically young outermost parts of the Cape, the dynamics are amplified by exposure, making for rapid and dramatic changes. Quote, "Places like Monomoy and Provincetown didn't even exist 6,000 years ago, which is very recent in geologic terms," end quote, said Greg Berman, Director of Natural Resources in Chatham. Quote, "Add to that the full exposure to the Atlantic swell and the relatively few hard structures along the eastern shore, and you get a coastline where sand is still free to move and reshape itself quickly," end quote. Ben Gutierrez, a geologist with the Coastal Change Project at the U.S. Geological Survey Woods Hole Coastal and Marine Science Center, said there's a point offshore from Eastham at which the direction of sediment movement diverges sharply. Quote, "That's related to the angle of the coast and the prevailing wave direction," end quote, he said. Sand moving through that system either goes north to shape Provincetown or south to Chatham and Monomoy. Gutierrez said that Cape Cod's combination of wind, waves, and mostly sandy, glacially deposited soils is what makes the coastline especially active. The primary conveyor belt along most beaches is the longshore transport or drift. Waves approach at an angle, and the swash carries sand diagonally along the shore. Repeated over time, this zigzag results in steady sideways movement along the coast. Other forces, tidal currents, storm-driven along-shore currents, and the wind moving dry sand above high tide also play a role. Marshes, though, are unsung heroes. Quote, marshes develop in areas that experience periodic inundation but are more protected and experience lower energy, Baker said. Quote, in these areas, the sediment is not churned up and more stable vegetation has been able to grow. Marshes absorb energy and floodwater, end quote. This resilience is driving erosion control efforts like the ongoing Heron River Estuary Restoration Project in Wellfleet and Truro, reconnecting nearly 1,000 acres of tidal wetlands to the ebb and flow of Cape Cod Bay, an approach rooted in the growing belief that working with and not against natural processes offers the strongest defense. For most of its history, the contours of Cape Cod have moved without resistance. Quote, it only becomes a problem when people build close to the shoreline or when structures alter natural movement and speed erosion up beyond its natural rate, Berman said. Early beach structures, he said, were small and movable. Once permanent homes were built close to the shoreline, retreat became much harder. And as houses got bigger and more expensive, quote, erosion increasingly became something people tried to fight, end quote. Baker described the same scenario, quote, people don't like to see the edge of their property change shape, end quote, she said. Quote, so we're trying to engineer our way out of the risk, end quote. Seawalls, revetments, groins, jetties, and beach nourishment are common interventions. Over time, they've created other problems, especially along the Cape's south shore, where numerous control structures interrupt sediment movement. Quote, some of the worst erosion on Cape Cod today is immediately downdrift of structures built decades ago, end quote, Berman said. Andrew Ashton, a coastal geomorphologist and associate scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, pointed out these structures, even if they are, quote, green, do not prevent beach erosion. Quote, in essence, these structures drink the milkshake, end quote, of their down-coast neighbors, starving them of sediment that undisturbed natural processes would bring, Ashton said. Groins are structures built perpendicular to the shore to prevent erosion and maintain beach widths, while jetties are usually built at the mouths of rivers or harbors to keep waterways navigable. Revetments and seawalls are used to stabilize shifting shorelines in the face of wave energy and erosion. Climate change as an accelerator. The Cape's tug-of-war between a moving shoreline and fixed development is now unfolding against the backdrop of climate change-driven sea level rise. Quote, sea level rise raises the starting point for every storm, end quote, Berman said. Quote, that means waves and surge can reach higher and flood deeper, even if the storm itself isn't stronger, end quote. While acknowledging that advancing sea rise will only worsen erosion, Ashton cautioned against tying the current coastal problem solely to climate change. Quote, what we are dealing with here is a coastal management problem, end quote, he said. In recent years, emphasis has shifted to green solutions, Baker said, like marsh and dune restoration and mindful beach nourishment, and in some places retreat, rather than continuously defending fixed infrastructure, is no longer dismissed outright, she said. Ashton agreed this needs to be part of the response. Over the long term, what we need is the political fortitude to prepare and plan for relocation of vital infrastructure away from the coast unless we want to spend significant amounts of our tax dollars on throwing sand into the ocean, end quote, he said. There is a silver lining. While some areas are eroding at rates that are near the largest measured in the world, end quote, Ashton said, much of this change is happening in places with little or no development, like the Cape Cod National Seashore, end of article. Next article, Rare Blue Whales Spotted Near Martha's Vineyard, an article by Heather McCarran. Endangered blue whales made a rare and exciting appearance off Cape Cod recently, thrilling marine biologists and marking two firsts for the New England Aquarium's aerial survey team. On February 27th, researchers with the aquarium's Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life spotted a blue whale at the base of Ladonia Canyon in the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument, about 130 miles southeast of Cape Cod. Less than 24 hours later, two more blue whales were seen about 15 miles south of Martha's Vineyard, the first time the aquarium has documented the species in southern New England waters. Seeing blue whales outside of their Canadian feeding ground is rare in the Atlantic to begin with, according to the associate scientist Catherine McKenna, who was aboard both flights. Finding them in two different areas of the ocean just 24 hours apart was a first for us, she said. The western North Atlantic population of blue whales is estimated to be only 400 to 600 individuals. Most research focuses on the species' summer feeding grounds in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, making sightings off Cape Cod, and especially south of the islands, unusual. Before the recent sightings, the aquarium biologists had seen blue whales in the United States waters just twice, once in the Northeast Canyons Monument in 2020, and once off Maine in the fall of 2023. Quote, encountering blue whales spread out across the waters of southern New England likely means that oceanographic conditions are ripe for them to find food, end quote, said research scientist Orla O'Brien. She said blue whales can range over expansive areas of ocean unseen by scientists. Quote, so each sighting gives us an important glimpse into their winter and spring movements, end quote. During the February 27th flight, the team also documented more than 300 other marine mammals in the monument, including 3 endangered fin whales, 3 endangered sperm whales, and about 50 pilot whales and hundreds of dolphins. The sightings were recorded a month after the federal government rolled back protections for the Northeast Canyons Monument, a unique underwater sanctuary southeast of the Cape at the edge of George's Bank. Aquarium researchers have spent nearly 10 years observing the marine mammal populations in the area, which is also home to deep-sea corals, sea turtles, and diverse fish. Jessica Redfern, an Associate Vice President of Ocean Conservation and Science at the Anderson Cabot Center, has been studying blue whales worldwide for more than 20 years. Sightings in the U.S. East Coast waters, she said, are, quote, always special to me. Quote, our aerial survey team has seen them twice in the monument, emphasizing the incredible diversity supported by the monument and why it is so important to protect this special place, end quote, she said. The team continues to survey southern New England and the Gulf of Maine with an eye toward getting an understanding of the movements of some of the ocean's largest and most elusive inhabitants, end of article. Next article, award-winning Navy commercial pilot flying for Cape Air at 71, an article by Susan Vaughn. Lucy Young fell in love with flying airplanes her senior year in college. 50 years later, at age 71, she's still flying. Quote, I had wanderlust from the get-go, Young said in a February 21st interview at Cape Air headquarters in Hyannis, where she has been a pilot for the last 2.5 years. That wanderlust has kept her flying even after retiring 6 years ago from American Airlines. That longevity also brought her recent recognition. Young received the prestigious Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award from the Federal Aviation Administration. Quote, in recognition of 50 years of exemplary aviation flight experience, distinguished professionalism, and steadfast commitment to aviation safety, end quote, the award reads. The award is given to pilots who have a combination of commercial and military experience and have demonstrated a commitment and contribution to the field of aviation. It was presented February 4th at the Cape Area Pilots Association meeting at Atlantic Aviation in Hyannis. 50 years with no accidents. Quote, it's a milestone award for doing it in a sustained manner, Young said. Quote, for many decades and not having any accidents. In addition to initially flying U.S. Navy planes around the country for several years, she listed all the commercial planes she has flown. First for Piedmont Airlines, which became U.S. Airways, and then American Airlines. She flew 737s, 757s, 767s, and A320s. Young added that the A320 was made famous by Captain Charlie Sully Sullenberger, who landed a U.S. Airways plane in the Hudson River in New York City in 2009, saving all 155 passengers and crew after the plane was hit by birds. Young is a friend of Sullenberger, whom she had worked with, and he wanted, quote, real pilots for the subsequent movie, Sully, in 2016. Young was vetted and chosen to co-pilot in a simulation flight, recreating the day of the flight, which appeared in the film and was used in the investigation of the accident. The simulations were done to see what kind of outcomes could be gained from the scenario where the birds failed both engines, she said. Quote, I've had so many interesting chapters in my career because I learned to fly in college my senior year, end quote, Young said. The Navy encouraged the NROTC Midshipman Scholarship recipients like her at Purdue University to take flying lessons at the airport next to the university to see if they were aeronautically suitable, she said. NROTC stands for Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps. Quote, I loved it, Young said, who got her pilot's license 3 days after graduation in 1976. She entered Navy flight training in October of that year and began a naval aviation career as a lieutenant, taking her around the country and breaking glass ceilings for women. Young became the first female Skyhawk instructor in May of 1981, as well as the first woman to qualify in naval air combat maneuvering during a time when female aviators were forbidden from combat duty stations. She transitioned to commercial flying when she joined the Federal Aviation Administration as a certification test pilot and becoming the first woman to hold such a position. In 1986, she began working as a flight engineer on the Boeing 727 when she joined Piedmont Airlines. During her tenure with the subsequent airlines, Young advanced to the first officer and captain, amassing nearly 20,000 total flight hours. While working full-time, Young lived the longest in Atlanta and Charlotte, North Carolina, for a shorter time in Boston. After 33 and a half years with commercial airlines, she retired in 2019 at the mandatory retirement age of 69. She came back to New England, where she had grown up, and moved into the cottage she owned in Falmouth. Then she met Linda Markham, former Cape Air president and CEO, and she had heard the company was looking for pilots. Markham was very encouraging, so she put her application and was hired in July of 23. Markham, who retired from Cape Air this year and serves on the board of Women in Aviation International, has been a strong proponent for advancing women in the aviation industry. Cape Air has hired many female pilots, Young said. I wanted to be part of that kind of an organization, Young said. She also is an advocate of women in aviation and girls in aviation. An exhibit dedicated to women in aviation featured Young's naval uniform and impressive roles she's held in aviation is on display at the New England Air Museum. Young took to the skies again as captain on the Cessna 402 at Cape Air, and she now flies 9 passenger planes. With Cape Air, Young said she likes the short flights, the interaction with the passengers, and doing her own flight and fuel plans, as well as traveling to beautiful places like Saranac Lake, New York, and Bar Harbor, Maine, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. She also flies to White Plains, New York, and John F. Kennedy International Airport and other Cape Air destinations. It is really fun. It's really engaging. It keeps me mentally stimulated, end quote, Young said. Quote, I love the challenges dealing with weather, loading the plane. It's like a self-contained operation, end quote. She flies up to 8 legs a day. Quote, what I like the most is safely carrying people from takeoff to destination. It is very rewarding, she said. Quote, it's the perfect part-time retirement job where I can be home every night. As far as her age, Young said, quote, it shows people if you stay healthy, you can just keep going. And that's all I have for today. This is Michael Long from the Audible Local Ledger in Mashpee, Massachusetts, signing off. See you next time. Thank you very much for listening.